The golden lights of the Royal Concert Hall sparkled like diamonds against the dark evening sky. Inside, hundreds of well-dressed people filled the velvet seats, their jewelry catching the light as they chatted excitedly. Tonight was no ordinary concert. It was the annual charity gala, where the city's wealthiest gathered to see and be seen while supporting local music programs. At the center of it all stood the most famous pianist in the country. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit and had the kind of confidence that only comes from years of standing ovations. Everyone knew his face from magazine covers and television interviews. His concerts sold out in minutes, and his recordings topped the classical music charts for months. The pianist had just finished his first set, playing pieces that made the audience gasp with amazement. His fingers moved across the keys like magic, creating sounds that seemed impossible for just 10 fingers to produce. The crowd loved him, and he loved their attention right back. During the intermission, he stepped down from the stage to mingle with his admirers. Rich donors surrounded him immediately, each wanting to shake his hand or take a photo. He smiled and nodded, enjoying every moment of praise. His manager and a few close friends formed a small circle around him, laughing at his jokes and hanging on his every word. That's when he noticed her. She sat alone in the very back row, far from the expensive front seats where the VIPs usually sat. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore a plain blue dress that looked like it had seen many years of careful use. Her hands rested quietly in her lap, and she seemed content to just watch the crowd from a distance. Something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she sat so still while everyone else chatted loudly, or maybe it was how she seemed completely out of place among all the designer gowns and expensive suits. Whatever it was, he found himself staring at her. "Look at that," he whispered to his friends, nodding toward the woman. "What do you think someone like that is doing at a place like this?" His friends turned to look, and one of them chuckled. "Probably got the cheapest ticket available. Maybe she's never heard real classical music before." "I bet she doesn't know a piano from a typewriter," another friend added, causing the group to laugh quietly. The pianist felt a mischievous idea forming in his mind. He was known for his quick wit and love of entertainment, both on and off the stage. The crowd adored his personality almost as much as his playing. Why not give them a little extra show tonight? "Watch this," he said to his friends with a sly grin. "I'm going to invite our friend back there to play something. It'll be fun to see what happens." His manager looked concerned. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "This is a formal event." But the pianist was already walking toward the back of the hall, his confidence growing with each step. He had performed in front of kings and presidents. He had played in the world's most famous concert halls. Surely he could handle one evening's entertainment with a random audience member. The woman didn't notice him approaching at first. She seemed lost in her own thoughts, occasionally glancing at the beautiful ceiling or the ornate decorations around the hall. When she finally saw him walking toward her, her eyes widened with surprise. "Good evening," he said with his most charming smile. "I hope you're enjoying the concert so far." "Oh yes," she replied softly. "It's been lovely. Thank you." Her voice was gentle and polite, but he could hear a slight nervousness in it. Perfect, he thought. This would be even more entertaining than he had hoped. "I couldn't help but notice you sitting here by yourself," he continued. "Are you a music lover?" She nodded slowly. "I've always enjoyed music, yes." By now, several people nearby had noticed the famous pianist talking to the woman in the back row. They began to gather around, curious about what was happening. His friends followed close behind, barely containing their excitement about the show they were about to witness. "Well then," the pianist said, his voice growing louder so more people could hear. "Since you love music so much, perhaps you'd like to try playing something yourself. I'd be happy to let you use the piano for a few minutes." The woman's face went pale. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly. This is your concert. I'm just here to listen." "Come now," he insisted, his tone becoming more playful. "Don't be shy. I'm sure everyone would love to hear what you can do. It's all in good fun." More people had gathered now, forming a small crowd around them. The pianist could see the excitement in their faces. They sensed that something interesting was about to happen, though they weren't quite sure what. "I really don't think that's appropriate," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should just stay in my seat." But the pianist wasn't giving up. He had committed to this idea now, and his audience was watching. "Oh, but I insist. Look, everyone wants to see what you can do. Don't disappoint them." He gestured to the crowd that had formed around them. Several people nodded and smiled, though some looked a bit uncomfortable with the situation. The woman glanced around at all the faces staring at her, clearly feeling trapped. "What's your favorite piece?" The pianist asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe something simple? Twinkle, twinkle, little star, perhaps?" A few people in the crowd chuckled at his suggestion, which only made the woman's face turn redder. She looked down at her hands and shook her head. "I don't really know if I should," she said quietly. "Of course you should," the pianist replied, now fully committed to his entertainment. "Music is for everyone, right? Besides, how hard can it be? I make it look pretty easy up there." His friends were grinning widely now, clearly enjoying the spectacle their famous friend was creating. The crowd continued to grow as more people noticed the commotion in the back of the hall. The woman sat in silence for a long moment, her hands clasped tightly together. The pianist could see her thinking, weighing her options. He was certain she would either run away embarrassed or stumble through a few notes before giving up. Either way, it would make for good entertainment. Finally, she looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was something in her eyes that wasn't quite fear or embarrassment. It was something deeper, sadder but also stronger. "If you really insist," she said quietly, "then I suppose I could try to play something." The pianist's grin grew wider. "Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we have a volunteer." The crowd began to clap politely, though many seemed unsure about what they were witnessing. The woman slowly stood up from her seat, smoothing down her simple dress with trembling hands. As she began to walk toward the stage, the pianist felt a surge of satisfaction. This was going to be the perfect intermission entertainment. His friends would talk about this evening for years to come. He had no idea that in the next few minutes, everything he thought he knew about music, talent, and human worth was about to change forever. The walk from the back row to the stage felt like it lasted forever. Each step the woman took seemed to echo through the now quiet concert hall. The audience watched her move slowly down the aisle, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to all the glittering gowns around her. The famous pianist followed behind her, still wearing that confident smile. He whispered something to one of his friends, who stifled a laugh. They were all expecting a good show, just not the kind they were about to get. Word had spread quickly through the hall during intermission. "The pianist is letting some random woman play," people whispered to each other. "This should be interesting." More and more audience members returned to their seats early, not wanting to miss whatever was about to happen. The woman reached the steps leading up to the stage and paused. She looked up at the magnificent grand piano sitting under the bright lights. It was a beautiful instrument, probably worth more money than most people made in several years. The black surface gleamed like a mirror and the ivory keys seemed to glow. "Go ahead," the pianist said encouragingly, though there was still that hint of amusement in his voice. "Don't be nervous. It's just a piano." She turned to look at him, and for a moment he saw something flicker across her face. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something else entirely, something that made him feel briefly uncertain about his plan. "Are you absolutely sure you want me to do this?" she asked quietly. "Of course," he replied, his confidence returning. "Everyone's waiting. Don't keep them in suspense." The woman nodded slowly and climbed the steps to the stage. The audience fell completely silent now. Even the ushers stopped moving around the hall. All eyes were focused on this ordinary-looking woman, who was about to sit at one of the world's finest pianos. She approached the piano bench carefully, as if it were something precious that might break if handled roughly. Her movements were deliberate and respectful. She adjusted the bench slightly, testing the height with a small bounce. This surprised the pianist a little. Most people would just sit down without thinking about such details. Before sitting, she did something unexpected. She walked around to look at the piano from different angles, running her hand gently along its curved edge. She seemed to be studying the instrument, learning about it. The audience watched in fascination, not sure what to make of her behavior. "It's a beautiful piano," she said softly, though her voice carried clearly in the silent hall. "A Steinway concert grand, if I'm not mistaken. Probably built in." The pianist's eyebrows shot up. He hadn't expected her to know anything about piano makes and models. "Yes, that's right," he said, sounding slightly less confident than before. She finally sat down on the bench and placed her hands in her lap. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. As if preparing herself for something important, the audience waited, some leaning forward in their seats. "What would you like me to play?" she asked, opening her eyes and looking directly at the pianist. He had been ready for this question. "Oh, anything you know. Maybe something simple. A children's song, perhaps?" There was that look again, the one he couldn't quite understand. She studied his face for a long moment, then turned back to the piano. "I think I'll play something that means a lot to me," she said quietly. "If that's all right with you." Before he could respond, she raised her hands above the keys. The hall became so quiet you could hear people breathing. Even the pianist's friends had stopped whispering among themselves. Her hands hovered over the keys for just a moment, and then something magical happened. The first notes that came from the piano were not what anyone expected. They were soft and gentle, but there was something about them that immediately captured everyone's attention. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, played with a touch so delicate it seemed like the keys were barely being pressed at all. The pianist recognized the piece immediately, and his confident smile began to fade. She was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most technically challenging and emotionally complex pieces ever written, and she wasn't just playing it correctly. She was playing it beautifully. Her fingers moved across the keys with a grace and precision that spoke of years of serious training. Every note was perfectly placed, every phrase shaped with deep musical understanding. But it wasn't just her technique that was impressive. There was something more in her playing, something that went beyond mere skill. As the melody unfolded, people in the audience began to lean forward in their seats. This wasn't the amateur performance they had expected to witness. This was something extraordinary. The woman's hands moved with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours at the piano, someone who understood music at its deepest level. The pianist stood frozen beside the stage, his mouth slightly open in amazement. All his arrogance and amusement had vanished, replaced by genuine shock. This wasn't possible. This ordinary-looking woman in her simple dress couldn't possibly play like this. But she was. As the piece continued, the emotional depth of her playing became even more apparent. The way she shaped each phrase told a story without words. You could hear longing in the gentle passages, hope in the rising melodies, and something that sounded like heartbreak in the minor key sections. Several people in the audience had tears in their eyes already, though they couldn't quite explain why. There was something about her playing that reached directly into their hearts, bypassing their minds entirely. It was as if she was speaking to them in a language older and more honest than words. The pianist's friends looked at each other in confusion. This wasn't how their joke was supposed to go. They had expected to laugh at some poor woman's clumsy attempt at playing piano. Instead, they found themselves listening to one of the most moving musical performances they had ever heard. The woman seemed completely lost in the music now. Her eyes were closed, and there was a peaceful expression on her face that hadn't been there before. Her whole body moved slightly with the rhythm, as if the music was flowing through her rather than from her. She looked like someone who had come home after a long journey. In the audience, an elderly man wiped tears from his cheeks. A young couple held hands tighter than before. A teenage girl forgot to check her phone for the first time all evening. The music was doing something to all of them, something they hadn't expected when they came to the concert hall that night. The pianist found himself stepping closer to the stage, drawn in by her playing despite himself. He had performed this same piece hundreds of times in concerts around the world, but he had never heard it played quite like this. There was something in her interpretation that was completely unique, something that spoke of personal experience and deep emotional truth. As the nocturne moved into its most challenging section, the woman's playing became even more remarkable. Her left hand maintained the gentle flowing accompaniment, while her right hand sang out the melody with breathtaking beauty. Every note was crystal clear, every phrase perfectly balanced. But it wasn't just technical perfection they were hearing. It was something much rarer. A musician who was completely honest about her emotions, sharing them through her playing without any pretense or show. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply telling her story through the music. The famous pianist realized with growing embarrassment that he was witnessing something he rarely encountered in his world of concert halls and competitions. He was hearing pure, unguarded musical expression from someone who played not for fame or money, but for the simple love of making music, and the audience could feel it too. As the woman continued playing, something extraordinary began to happen in the concert hall. The Chopin Nocturne seemed to weave a spell over everyone present. People who had come to the gala to see and be seen suddenly found themselves completely absorbed in the music flowing from the stage. The famous pianist stood motionless beside the piano, his earlier confidence completely shattered. He watched her hands move across the keys with a fluidity that spoke of decades of practice. This wasn't someone who had learned piano as a hobby or taken a few lessons as a child. This was someone who understood the instrument at its deepest level. Her playing told a story that went far beyond the notes on the page. In the gentle passages, you could hear the sound of a young girl practicing scales in a small room, dreaming of concert halls and standing ovations. In the more complex sections, there was the determination of someone who had worked tirelessly to perfect their craft, spending countless hours refining every detail. But there was something else in the music, too. Something that made it different from any professional performance the audience had ever heard. There was a sadness, a sense of dreams that had been put aside, of paths not taken. Yet mixed with that sadness was something beautiful, acceptance, wisdom, and a love of music that had survived despite everything. The woman's eyes remained closed as she played, and tears had begun to stream down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of embarrassment or fear. They were tears of joy, of finally being able to share something precious that she had kept hidden for so long. In the audience, people were having their own emotional reactions. A businessman in the front row found himself thinking about the violin he had abandoned in college to focus on his career. A wealthy socialite remembered the songs her grandmother used to hum while cooking. A young music student realized she had never heard anyone play with such pure emotion before. The piece was reaching its most demanding section now, where the melody soared above a complex accompaniment pattern. The woman's right hand sang out the notes with breathtaking clarity, while her left hand provided a foundation that was both technically perfect and emotionally supportive. Every phrase was shaped with the kind of musical intelligence that only comes from years of serious study. The famous pianist recognized every detail of her interpretation, and he was amazed by what he heard. She was making musical choices that he had never considered, finding meaning in passages that he had always played as mere technical displays. Her version of the piece revealed depths that he had never explored in his own performances. As the music continued, fragments of the woman's story began to emerge in her playing. You could hear the young conservatory student who had won competitions and earned praise from her teachers. There was the excitement of someone who had once believed that a career in music was not just possible, but inevitable. But then the music changed, becoming more complex and bittersweet. The melody began to carry hints of sacrifice and difficult choices. In the way she played certain phrases, you could sense the moment when life had demanded something different from her, when dreams had to be set aside for more pressing responsibilities. The audience listened in fascination as the story unfolded through the music. Here was the sound of someone caring for aging parents, putting their own ambitions aside to ensure their loved ones were comfortable. There was the quiet heroism of daily sacrifice, the strength it takes to give up your dreams without becoming bitter about it. Yet even as the music spoke of sacrifice, it also celebrated the beauty that could be found in such choices. The way she played the tender passages suggested that caring for her parents had taught her something about love that no concert career could have provided. Her music had deepened during those years of service, gaining an emotional richness that came from real-life experience. The pianist found himself thinking about his own career, his pursuit of fame and recognition. He had always believed that success meant performing on the world's biggest stages, earning critical acclaim and financial rewards. But listening to this woman play, he began to wonder if he had been measuring success by the wrong standards. Her playing continued to reveal layers of meaning that went far beyond technical skill. In the way she approached each phrase, you could hear someone who had learned to find joy in small moments. A perfectly executed trill, a beautifully shaped melody, the simple pleasure of making music even when no one was listening. The nocturne was building toward its emotional climax now, and the woman's playing became even more intense. Her whole body swayed gently with the music, as if she were channeling something larger than herself. The piano seemed to respond to her touch like a living thing, producing sounds of incredible beauty and power. People throughout the hall were openly weeping now, though many couldn't explain exactly why. There was something about her performance that connected with universal human experiences. The pain of dreams deferred, the beauty of selfless love, the bittersweet recognition that life rarely unfolds as we originally planned. A middle-aged woman in the third row thought about her own abandoned dreams of becoming a writer. A retired teacher remembered the music lessons she had given up to raise her children. An elderly man reflected on the choices he had made and the roads he had chosen not to travel. But the music wasn't just about sadness or regret. There was something triumphant in it too, a celebration of the human capacity to find meaning and beauty, even in unexpected circumstances. The woman's playing suggested that perhaps there were many different ways to live a successful life, many different definitions of what it meant to fulfill your potential. The famous pianist realized that he was witnessing something rare and precious, a performance that came from a place of complete honesty and vulnerability. This woman wasn't playing to impress anyone or to advance her career. She was simply sharing her truth through music, offering her experiences as a gift to everyone present. As the piece moved through its final variations, her playing became even more nuanced and expressive. Every note seemed to carry weight, every silence spoke volumes. She was demonstrating mastery not just of technique, but of the deepest aspects of musical communication. The hall had become so quiet that you could hear every subtle dynamic change, every delicate pedal effect. The audience was completely absorbed in the performance, experiencing the kind of focused attention that rarely happens in our distracted modern world. The woman's face, streaked with tears, showed a piece that hadn't been there when she first walked to the piano. This was clearly a moment she had been waiting for without even knowing it, a chance to share the music that lived in her heart, to demonstrate that her years of study and practice hadn't been wasted, even though they had never led to a conventional career. The pianist's friends, who had gathered to watch what they expected to be an embarrassing spectacle, now stood in stunned silence. Their casual cruelty had been transformed into something approaching reverence. They were witnessing artistry of the highest level, performed by someone they had dismissed as unworthy of their attention. As the nocturne approached its conclusion, the emotional intensity in the hall continued to build. The woman's playing had taken everyone present on a journey through the complexities of human experience, reminding them of their own struggles, sacrifices, and hidden dreams. The music was about to reach its final haunting conclusion, and no one in the audience would ever forget what they had witnessed. The final notes of the nocturne hung in the air like jewels suspended in time. The woman's hands remained poised above the keys for a moment after the last sound had faded, as if she were reluctant to break the spell that had settled over the concert hall. Then, slowly, she lifted her hands and placed them gently in her lap. She opened her eyes, which were still wet with tears, and looked out at the audience for the first time since she had begun playing. What she saw took her breath away. The entire concert hall had been transformed. Hundreds of people sat in complete silence, many with tears streaming down their faces. Some had their hands pressed to their hearts. Others sat with their mouths slightly open, as if they couldn't quite believe what they had just experienced. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind of profound quiet that follows something so beautiful and meaningful that words seem inadequate. The famous pianist stood frozen beside the stage, his face a mixture of awe, shame, and something approaching reverence. All his earlier arrogance had completely evaporated. He looked like a man who had just witnessed a miracle and was trying to understand what it meant. Finally, somewhere in the middle of the hall, one person began to clap. It started as a slow, deliberate applause, the kind reserved for truly exceptional performances. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding with an intensity that shook the walls of the concert hall. But this wasn't ordinary applause. People weren't just clapping their hands together mechanically. They were applauding with their whole bodies, with tears in their eyes, with expressions of gratitude and amazement on their faces. Some people were applauding so hard their hands hurt. Others had to stop clapping to wipe their eyes. The woman sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. She had never experienced anything like this before. During her conservatory days, she had received polite applause after performances, but nothing that felt so genuine, so deeply felt. This audience wasn't applauding her technique or her career accomplishments. They were applauding her heart. The ovation continued for what felt like forever. People didn't want it to end. They didn't want to return to their ordinary lives after experiencing something so extraordinary. The applause became a way of holding on to the moment, of expressing emotions that had been stirred up by her playing. Gradually, individual voices began to emerge from the crowd. "Incredible," someone called out. "Beautiful," said another. "Thank you," shouted a woman from the balcony, her voice breaking with emotion. These weren't the typical compliments you might hear at a concert. They were expressions of genuine gratitude from people who felt they had been given something precious. The woman finally stood up from the piano bench, and the applause grew even louder. She looked uncertain about what to do, clearly not used to being the center of attention in such a setting. She gave a small, modest bow, which only made the audience clap harder. As she began to walk toward the steps leading down from the stage, something unexpected happened. The famous pianist stepped forward and began applauding too. But his applause was different from everyone else's. He was clapping with the fervor of someone who had just learned something important about himself and about music. When their eyes met, the woman paused. She could see the change in his face, the genuine remorse and admiration that had replaced his earlier smugness. For a moment they looked at each other in understanding, and she gave him a small nod that seemed to say she held no hard feelings. The pianist stepped closer to her, and the audience gradually quieted down to hear what he might say. He looked nervous now, completely different from the confident performer who had invited her to play as a joke just minutes earlier. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's excellent acoustics. "I invited you to play for the wrong reasons, and I was completely wrong about everything. That was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard." The woman smiled gently. "Music has a way of surprising us all," she said simply. "Thank you for giving me the chance to play such a wonderful instrument." Her gracious response made the pianist feel even more ashamed of his original intentions. Here was someone who could have embarrassed him in front of hundreds of people, but instead chose to respond with kindness and dignity. The audience began applauding again, this time for both of them, for her incredible performance and for his public acknowledgement of his mistake. But the focus remained on the woman, this ordinary-looking person who had just delivered an extraordinary musical experience. As the applause finally began to die down, people throughout the hall started talking excitedly to each other. "Did you know she could play like that? I've never heard anything so moving. Where did she learn to play? Why isn't she performing professionally?" The woman began to make her way back toward her seat in the last row, but she didn't get far. People stopped her along the way, wanting to shake her hand or tell her how much her playing had affected them. An elderly gentleman with tears still visible on his cheeks thanked her for reminding him why he had fallen in love with classical music as a child. A young music student asked if she taught lessons. A wealthy patron wanted to know if she had ever considered recording an album. A music critic who had attended the gala pulled out his phone to write notes about what he had just witnessed, but perhaps the most moving response came from a middle-aged woman who approached her with obvious emotion. "My mother used to play piano," she said, struggling to speak through her tears. "She passed away last year, and I haven't been able to listen to classical music since then because it made me too sad. But hearing you play tonight, it reminded me of all the joy music brought to her life. Thank you for giving me that back." The woman who had played hugged this stranger, understanding perfectly what she meant. Music had the power to heal, to connect people across time and space, to make sense of experiences that words couldn't adequately express. As more people approached her, word began to spread beyond the concert hall. Someone had recorded part of her performance on their phone, despite the usual restrictions against such things. Within minutes, the video was being shared on social media, along with messages like, "You have to hear this," and "This will restore your faith in humanity." The famous pianist watched from a distance as people continued to surround the woman, each wanting to share how her music had affected them. He realized that in trying to embarrass her, he had inadvertently created something magical. Her performance would be talked about for years to come, not because of any publicity campaign or marketing strategy, but because it had touched people's hearts in a genuine way. Meanwhile, the concert hall staff stood amazed at what they had witnessed. Many of them had worked at the venue for decades and had seen countless performances by world-renowned musicians, but they had never seen an audience reaction quite like this one. As the evening continued and people gradually began to leave, many stopped to take one more look at the piano where such beauty had been created. The instrument itself seemed somehow different now, as if it had been blessed by the honest emotion that had flowed through it. The woman's simple act of sharing her music had changed everyone who heard it, including herself. 3 weeks after the charity gala, the world had changed for everyone who was in that concert hall. The video of the woman's performance had spread across the internet like wildfire, viewed by millions of people who were hungry for something real and meaningful in their lives. The famous pianist sat in his dressing room before what should have been another triumphant concert. But tonight felt different. Ever since that evening at the gala, he found himself questioning everything about his approach to music. His performances were still technically perfect, but somehow they felt hollow compared to what he had witnessed that night. He had tried to track down the woman who had played so beautifully, wanting to speak with her again, but she seemed to have disappeared back into her quiet life. The concert hall staff couldn't provide her contact information due to privacy policies, and she hadn't responded to any of the public requests for interviews that had appeared in newspapers and magazines. Meanwhile, across the city, the woman was living her life much as she always had. She still lived in the same modest apartment, still took care of the same daily responsibilities that had shaped her routine for years. But something fundamental had shifted inside her since that night at the concert hall. Her phone had been ringing constantly with offers from recording companies, concert promoters, and music schools. Famous venues wanted to book her for solo recitals. Music professors offered her teaching positions at prestigious conservatories. Wealthy patrons proposed funding her return to professional performance, but she had quietly declined almost every offer that came her way. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the recognition or the opportunities. After decades of keeping her musical abilities private, it was overwhelming to suddenly have so many people interested in her story. But she had learned something important about herself. During those years away from the concert stage, she had discovered that her greatest joy came not from performing for large audiences or receiving critical acclaim, but from the simple act of making music itself. During her years caring for her parents, she had played piano every evening after they went to sleep, not because she had to, but because it fed something essential in her soul. The morning after receiving yet another offer to record a classical album, she made a decision that surprised everyone who knew about her sudden fame. She called the local community center and volunteered to teach piano lessons to children whose families couldn't afford private instruction. Within a week, word had spread through the neighborhood that an incredibly talented pianist was offering free lessons at the community center. Parents began bringing their children, not because they had heard about the viral video, but because they wanted their kids to learn music from someone who clearly loved it. The woman's first student was a 7-year-old girl whose family had recently moved to the country and spoke very little English. But music, as the woman had always known, was a universal language. Within minutes of sitting at the old, slightly out-of-tune piano in the community center, the little girl was giggling with delight as she learned to play simple melodies. News of her volunteer teaching eventually reached the famous pianist, who had been searching for her through mutual contacts in the music world. When he finally found the community center and saw her patiently working with a group of enthusiastic children, he understood why she had turned down all those lucrative offers. He stood in the doorway watching her teach, remembering his own first piano lessons decades earlier. Back then, music had felt like magic, full of infinite possibilities and pure joy. Somewhere along the way, as his career had taken off and the pressures of professional success had mounted, he had lost touch with that original sense of wonder. The woman noticed him standing there and smiled warmly, as if she had been expecting him to find her eventually. After her lesson ended and the children had gone home with their parents, she invited him to sit at the piano with her. "I wanted to thank you again," he said, though the words felt inadequate. "That night changed everything for me. I've been thinking about why I really play music, what it all means." She nodded knowingly. Music has a way of bringing us back to what's important, doesn't it? Sometimes we need to get lost before we can find our way home. They talked for hours that afternoon, sharing stories about their different paths through the music world. He told her about the pressure he felt to constantly perform at the highest level, the way competition and commercial success had gradually drained some of the joy from his playing. She shared her own journey, how stepping away from professional performance had actually deepened her connection to music. "I thought I was giving up my dreams when I left the conservatory," she said, "but I realized now that I was just finding a different way to live them." Their conversation led to an unexpected collaboration. The famous pianist began visiting the community center regularly, not as a celebrity making a charitable appearance, but as someone genuinely interested in rediscovering the pure pleasure of making music with others. He found that playing simple duets with enthusiastic children or helping nervous teenagers prepare for school recitals filled him with a satisfaction that was different from anything he experienced in professional concerts. The music felt more honest, more connected to real human emotions and experiences. Word of their partnership spread through the music world, inspiring other professional musicians to think differently about their careers and their relationship with their art. Some famous performers began volunteering at schools and community centers. Others started incorporating more personal, emotional elements into their concerts. The woman's story became a symbol of something many people had been searching for without knowing it, proof that success could be measured in ways that had nothing to do with fame or money. Her choice to prioritize teaching children over recording albums resonated with people who had made similar decisions in their own lives, choosing family over career advancement or personal fulfillment over financial gain. 6 months after the charity gala, the famous pianist gave what many critics called the best performance of his career, but it wasn't at a prestigious concert hall or music festival. It was at the community center, playing a simple benefit concert to raise money for new instruments for the children's program. The woman accompanied him on several pieces, and together they created music that was technically excellent, but also deeply moving. The small audience of parents, children, and neighbors gave them a standing ovation that felt just as meaningful as any they had received in grand concert halls. After the concert, as they were packing up the music and turning off the lights, the pianist realized that he had learned something invaluable from the woman's example. True artistry wasn't about impressing people or building a reputation. It was about being honest in your expression and generous with your gifts. The woman went back to her quiet life, but it was enriched now by the knowledge that her music continued to touch lives in ways she never could have imagined. Her students progressed rapidly, not just because of her technical expertise, but because she taught them that music was a way of sharing your heart with the world. Years later, when people talked about that magical night at the charity gala, they remembered it not just as an amazing musical performance, but as a reminder that the most powerful art comes from the most authentic places. The woman had shown them that keeping your dreams alive didn't always mean pursuing them in the most obvious ways. Sometimes the greatest success comes from finding your own unique way to share what you love with the world, even if that path looks nothing like what anyone else expects.